Hello, everyone, and welcome to Road to Atlanta, driven by Cadillac. My name is Brandon Adams. This is former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson. And we are here once again to look at the big matchup taking place on Saturday, the SEC Championship between Georgia and Alabama. And Mike, I don't know about you, but I can't quite seem to get this week to go by fast enough. I am so ready for 4 p.m. on Saturday, so ready for the kickoff, so ready for everything that's going to be going on over the course of the next few days. It is going to be quite a week for Dog Nation, but also the Alabama side as well.
Yeah, definitely. And listen, I'm excited to get it kicked off, but there's some nerves on my side of this thing. I mean, definitely, I'm nervous / excited, but you're right. The days and the hours have been gone line. Seemed like months.
I think it's interesting to hear you say you're nervous. And listen, we've had former players before. Our buddy David Green, the great former Georgia quarterback, he talks about this all the time, that he was so much less nervous as a player than he is now as a fan because you've got no way to channel that energy. If you're watching the game from the stands, or if you're watching the game, on TV, all you can do is sit there and watch other people do it, as opposed to kind of going out there and getting your own hands dirty, taking your mind off that. So kind of funny to hear a now former player say, I'm going to be really nervous come Saturday.
Yeah, I can feel myself tense up. Honestly, when I watch the games on TV or I'm in the stadium watching Alabama play, I'm sitting there, like I can feel myself tensing up like I'm still trying to lay a block, but I can't do it on the field anymore, so it makes me more nervous just watching.
The other thing that's kind of ironic about that is Mike from the Alabama side saying he's nervous and he's tense, but so much of the conversation this week has centered around Georgia's potential anxiety or potential tension about going up against what's been described as kind of the mystique of Alabama and this reputation, justifiably so, that Alabama's built for itself over the course of the last few years. A lot of Georgia players and coaches, including Georgia's Kirby Smart, have talked about that this week. Let me give you an example. Jonathan Ledbetter, the great Georgia defensive end, speaking on Monday to reporters on this subject of, are you afraid of Alabama? Does Alabama give you something to be worried about? And I think if you're a Georgia fan, you will really appreciate the candid words here from Ledbetter. Let's take a look at this as we get started here today.
In the country and people aren't giving you a chance?
That's cool with me, man. I let the people think what they want. I mean, I think, everyone is entitled to their own opinion, but they're not out there playing, the football that we do. They're not out there, sweating for their brother, doing it for them. So, they don't really understand. And, I mean, that's fine with me, but, we're going to give it everything we got. And I'm confident in my guys and my team. And, I've been here for a while, and we've put in just as much work as them. So, to have that is, it is what it is.
Alabama, but you guys went toe-to-toe with them last year. Is that kind of mystique gone from that team? It's just another team?
I mean, like I said, you can hype up whoever you want for a fight, whether we get hyped up or they get hyped up. But whoever comes out there, the first punch that's thrown, whoever gets hit in the mouth first, it's a dog fight from there. And it'll be that. And we're ready for it. We expect that. We want it.
I think what Ledbetter's saying there, for the most part, is true, no matter which side you cheer for, is that because these teams have played before, and Georgia was in a big spot last year. They haven't lived here as long as Alabama has, but they were in this spot last year, winning the SEC championship, going to the Rose Bowl, playing Alabama for the national championship. That this is really more about hey, let's go out there and punch each other in the mouth, let's get into a fight, and let's make it about football, as opposed to thinking too much about the fact of, teams don't typically beat Alabama and Georgia's a big underdog. Maybe that's a little bit of a fuel of momentum, but I wouldn't expect any of these Georgia guys to be afraid of what they're going to see on that other Alabama sideline.
Absolutely, they shouldn't. And I talked about this a little bit yesterday. I dealt with this own situation when I was in my playing career, going up against Tim Tebow and the Florida Gators. It was Urban Meyer. They already won 2 national titles. Tim Tebow, Brandon Spikes, Carlos Dunlap. I mean, you name it, they were all on the field. We weren't supposed to be in that game. We had replaced all these starters and done all these things. We were trying to topple the mountain. And so I love the fact that he comes out and says that. I wouldn't expect him to feel any different. And on the Alabama side of things, I'll give you guys a little perspective on how I sit on the Alabama side of things. Some people like to look at Bama, and I know it's a popular notion to say, hey, listen, some teams are beat before they even take the field because it's this Bama mystique. Bama still has to go out there and win the football games. Both teams have to go out there and still, complete those passes and make those runs and make those blocks. So it does come down to the football game and who is the better football team. That's why we can't wait till Saturday.
Tyler Davis says this would probably be the biggest win in UGA history. And listen, Georgia's had a lot of big wins, including, last year getting the national championship game. But there's a part of me that won't fully deny what Tyler's saying there. And it's one of the reasons why, at least the issue of the so-called Alabama mystique, why it comes up, because of what it does mean for Georgia. This is maybe one of the big differences between these two programs. As from a talent standpoint, they at least look a lot more similar than they would have a couple of years ago. Georgia's closed a pretty significant gap there in that regard. but in terms of institutional memory of being in games like this, there's no doubt that Alabama's been in more. Now, Georgia's been in some, which helps, I think, protect Georgia's mindset for this game. But there's no doubt that Alabama's played a lot more games of this magnitude, including the players on this roster have played a lot more games of this magnitude than really what Georgia has.
Well, definitely, too. And honestly, coming from Alabama perspective, I think it helps Alabama just a little bit that the national title game last year was in Mercedes-Benz Stadium, because otherwise, Bama wouldn't have been in Mercedes-Benz Stadium, save for the Florida State game last year. So they have a little bit of that behind them as well. But you're right. You know, Georgia last year with Jake Fromm going through the SEC title game against Auburn, going out and playing Oklahoma in the Rose Bowl, they've seen some of these big-time situations. But you're right, Alabama, I mean, their senior class has been in the national title game 3 years in a row, and they do have a little bit more of that background.
There's also a sense in which Georgia has probably earned a right to say it can go toe-to-toe with Alabama in a way that some programs from the SEC and around the college football footprint might not be able to. In fact, Kirby Smart talked about that on Monday. This notion of, as a former Alabama assistant, looking across the sideline and seeing some teams that just knew they couldn't match up and were going to be overwhelmed by the moment, overwhelmed by the team in crimson and white, or is it crimson and cream on the other side? There, Kirby Smart said, "You know what? That happens for some teams, but probably not this Georgia team." Here's Kirby.
Yeah, I don't know that it helps at all. I think the biggest thing is preparing your team the right way to play and not getting overwhelmed by the moment. If anything, I've probably seen more teams lose it in the warm-ups, just trying to get all amped up and all that. I mean, you got to go play your best game. You got to be yourself, and you got to be the best version of you, and you can't worry about the rest. A lot of those teams that I witnessed that, they didn't have near as good of players as us either. So I think when you look at it and you say, okay, what is the talent level? What is the talent gap? They've got an extremely talented team. We respect that. But we also got a good football team. And our kids got a lot of pride in performance, and they're not basing that on last year's, because there's a lot of those kids off that team. I mean, there's very few. I know defensively for us, there's very few guys that are back returning starters. We got a few on offense. But teams are different. Their team's different too. So this is two different teams, and the good thing is we both get to go on the field and play.
There's two things there that Kirby Smart says that I find really interesting. First of all, he said when it comes to teams being overwhelmed by Alabama, it's usually the talent gap that overwhelms you more than just the mystique of the houndstooth hat and all the great imagery that surrounds the Alabama football program. I think he's right about that. I also think he's right when he kind of alludes to being overwhelmed by the hype of the moment. And you mentioned this a moment ago. I said this yesterday. I think Mercedes-Benz Stadium at 4 p.m. on the first Saturday in December with the entire country watching. There's like, a dozen football games all day long, something like that. I think that's the kind of thing that not every player can handle and not every team can handle. And because both these teams have been in this spot before, they're all, and now a lot of Georgia freshmen, haven't been here before, and some of the sophomores didn't play last year, but they are with teammates who did. I think they've kind of overcome that hurdle, because I do think getting used to the stage is almost just as important as getting prepared for the team that you're going to be playing against.
And listen, there's not that much of a talent gap between Georgia and Alabama anymore. Let's just be frank about that. The players and the size of the players and the size of the offensive linemen and the size of the defensive linemen, Georgia's got just as big of offensive line. I mean, you used to look at Alabama back in 2011, 2012 and say, look at that offensive line. I mean, I used to take NFL teammates back to Tuscaloosa, and they would be shocked at the size of Alabama's offensive line. You have that in Athens now. There is one thing I want to point back to that Jonathan Ledbetter said just a minute ago that kind of brought up some old emotions in my head. When we won the national title in 2009, everybody asked us how we did it. And my answer always was, I legitimately think we outworked everybody. I think we outworked everybody every day in practice. We practiced harder in 2009 than I had at any point in my entire career. Kirby knows that, and Kirby knows that work ethic, and he has carried that over to Athens. And I think you hear some of that confidence come out in Jonathan Ledbetter. He says, listen, they got to take the field just like us. We've worked just as hard as they have to get to this point. And I love that angle coming from him, because I know exactly what he's talking about.
It's Road to Atlanta, driven by Cadillac. That's the former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson. You can hear every day as a part of the Backroads Sports Network. We are backroads.com to find out more about that. My name is Brandon Adams. Welcome into the program. Fred Davidson on YouTube says, I'm going to say it because we do, and it's coming. Whether we want them or not, we want Bama. So Fred's obviously getting excited about this game coming up on Saturday, and this whole notion of we want Bama. Jake Fromm kind of echoes that same thing as well. We heard from Fromm yesterday, who does not want to play into the mighty underdog card. We've talked about that on our program, the Morning Dog Nation Daily, or as we're calling it this week, Underdog Nation Daily. Fromm's not playing that card, though. Once again here today, Fromm says, this is just another game, this is just another team, and they're going to give us their best shot. We're going to give them our best shot. Here's Jake Fromm.
Yeah, I mean, they're another football team. I feel like we have a great group of guys in our locker room, so we're going to come out swinging and, play football. Yeah, I mean, they do a great job of rushing the front of the pocket, and, it is what it is. You come out and, my feet have to be quicker, progressions have to be quicker, and, that's one thing I remember from last year, that definitely the front of the pocket's getting there a little bit faster, and they do a great job of it.
I think it's interesting that Fromm kind of takes it back to the X and O's football point. Something that he learned about Alabama after having played them a year ago is the way that pressure does come up the middle. They're not looking to collapse the pocket from the sides.
Yes.
They're looking to bust that thing in half from the middle. We saw Raekwon Davis do a lot of that a year ago. Obviously, Alabama's got Quinnen Williams, who's lethal in that spot this year. And so from Fromm's standpoint, that's something that he learned last year that he's obviously not, I want to say worried about, but certainly concerned about and paying close attention to going into the game this Saturday. Expect that pressure to come from the middle. And let's face it, when Jake Fromm's in the game, and my expectation is he'll be playing the lion's share of the game for Georgia, up the middle pressure is a lot more difficult for him to deal with than it would be for Justin Fields. Fromm would prefer the side pressure so he can step into the pocket.
Yep.
Fields would prefer the up the middle pressure so he can move to the side. That seems to be kind of the way that both these guys would think about it.
Yeah, and I know that. Listen, Georgia's fans have seen Georgia and the way Kirby Smart's gone about rushing the passer as well, and they're going to rush these guys differently. If you watch when Bama takes the field and they're rushing Jake Fromm, they're going to collapse the pocket from all angles. They're going to bull rush with two arms into the offensive lineman's chest. That's how they attack the pocket. That's how they collapse. That's how they affect the pass rusher. So it will be interesting to see the way Bama rushes Jake Fromm and vice versa, the way Georgia's defense comes out and rushes Tua Tagovailoa, because both of these guys, and I think you join me in saying this, a little bit underrated athletically. I think both of the pocket passers for both these teams, a little bit underrated. You can see those guys go out and pick up first downs with their legs.
Well, I don't remember if it was our show here or if it was Dog Nation Daily in the morning, but a lot of the stuff we've heard from Jonathan Ledbetter this week, when he's talking about Tua Tagovailoa, he has almost exclusively talked about his ability to keep plays alive with his legs. Not running for a first down, although we did see him run for a touchdown against LSU. It's keeping the play alive long enough to find a receiver to throw to. The play he made against Tennessee, I forget the moment in the game, or I believe, I even forget who caught the touchdown pass. It may have been Ruggs, but where he just kind of, scrambles around, keeps the play alive, and throws a touchdown pass. Yeah. That's the kind of athleticism that you probably don't see from Tagovailoa until you're actually facing him during a game.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about it. And I think some of the defenses, listen, when you go against Tagovailoa, and the reason you saw that against LSU was that LSU was in man coverage. They had Greedy Williams, they had Christian Fulton, they had Grant Delpit. With all these receivers running streaks on the outside for Alabama, all these DBs start to turn their back and chase these guys down the field. Tua Tagovailoa looks out and says, you know what? I've got a lot of room to run. I can run right up these guys back down the field. I don't think that's what Georgia will do so much. When I look at it, I think they're going to run man probably to one side of the field, obviously with DeAndre Baker, and they're going to look to the other side of the field. They're going to run some type of hybrid zone scheme on one type of the field. It's going to be really, really interesting. I'm telling you right now, for X's and O's guys that watch football, coaches, and really follow schemes, this is going to be a great Saturday.
It's going to be a great Saturday, and a lot of it will be decided by the X's and O's, but there's also, it won't just be the roof of Mercedes-Benz Stadium hanging over Georgia's head on Saturday. It's also going to be that reminder of what happened a year ago when Georgia lost in famous fashion in overtime to Alabama, the national championship game. Everybody in the world of the media, what Mike and I do for a living, we all seem to want to know, how much is Georgia using this as motivation this week? The mystique of Alabama that we talked about earlier, that mystique would seem to only be added to by the fact that Alabama won in such dramatic fashion a year ago. Kirby Smart will have you believe, though, that is not something that Georgia's paying attention to. That's not even something that personally motivates Smart. Here he is with more on that.
I really think it's to each his own. I mean, that's not a motivating factor for me. I mean, that's not driving me. What's driving me is the young men in this room that'll be in here in a couple hours trying to do my best job for them. And that's what our coaching staff has to do. We've got to put our guys in the best situation to be successful. And that's all we're concerned with. Because when you let all the outside forces and the outside motivation control you, sometimes you get emotional and you don't make the best decisions. We got to put the best plan together we can to play our best game against Alabama, not the Alabama last year, not the Georgia last year. So that's motivation for a lot of people, and that's the media talk. But for us, it's what do I have to do to play my best game? That's what I want to work on.
I've always joked with you that I feel like if I'm an expert on anything when it comes to football, it's what fans believe. You're a former player, you know that. I'm a current fan, lifelong fan, so I kind of understand the way that fans look at this. And for some reason, I can't quite put my finger on this. I've told you a million times already. I've told my audience in the morning for Underdog Nation Daily that I want Georgia to use the underdog thing as extra motivation for this game. For some reason, though, I don't want them going anywhere near 2nd and 26. I don't care about that. That's not for me a storyline for this game, even though it is a potential source of motivation. But most of the defensive players who were chiefly involved in that play for Georgia aren't here anymore. Tua Tagovailoa still is, but I feel like that the underdog thing is so much more of usable fodder than the way that last year's game ended. Now, Kirby Smart says it's about the X's and O's and getting prepared, and that's all fine and well. But in terms of the way that emotion bleeds into this at all, I love the underdog storyline so much more than I like the let's get revenge because we lost this team last year storyline. I kind of agree with Smart, at least from the standpoint of let's not pay too much attention to what happened a year ago.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting from my perspective, too, because I've sat in these locker rooms where you've been underdogs or you've been hyped up, and coaches don't like to use this, and here's why. They can't really measure or they can't really control.
That's a good point.
They can't really control the emotion when you're in the underdog role or when you're in the revenge role. And Nick Saban said a lot of the same things this week. Listen, this isn't anything, and he said it last week, when they were about to play Auburn because they lost to Auburn last year. It was, hey, we don't really want to use revenge as a factor. We want
say that, yeah.
We want people to play their game. We want our guys to play Alabama football, not so much just change the way they do it because they're going against Auburn. I think that's what Kirby Smart's trying to echo is, listen, it's going to be an emotional game either way, but we don't want you to go out and try to get revenge. We don't want you to try to relive last year's game. You go out and play Georgia football the right way, and you'll come out on top of this thing. I think that's his message.
Terry Harpstrite in our Facebook comment section says, this is the year that the student takes down the teacher, obviously a reference to Kirby Smart beating Nick Saban. Let me ask you, from the Alabama perspective, and obviously we do appreciate your knowledge of the other side in this game on Saturday, if Alabama was looking for its potential motivation, now winning and going to the playoff is motivation enough, but the same way that Georgia might feed off the nobody believes in us card or might feed off the, hey, we got to get revenge because Alabama beat us a year ago thing, is that Alabama's potential source of motivation of, here's this guy that used to be here that's trying to, rebuild what we have here
Right,
somewhere
yeah,
else?
yeah.
I mean, is there something else? And I'm honestly curious of your answer. Is there a potential source of motivation beyond just winning this game that Alabama might use the same way that Georgia's potentially got some fodder for that?
I think in the back of a lot of guys' heads, you could probably make that a storyline. But I think the fact that Kirby Smart, now this is going on 3 years since he's been in Alabama, I think most of the current players, save for some of the guys in the senior class that have been around back when Kirby was there, most of the guys inside the program now, especially a guy like Tua Tagovailoa that's going to take the field, there's not really so much of a factor for that. They look at it and say, listen, I respect what Kirby Smart's done. They've probably heard stories from a lot of the other players. I know and love Kirby Smart, know and love Nick Saban. I think they're both incredible football coaches. I don't even personally, being a Bama guy, I don't look at Kirby and say, let me stomp this guy out because he's at Georgia now. I think it's just, I think and listen, I feel the same way about Jeremy Pruitt at Tennessee. Mm-hmm. I think you're excited to see people that you know and love and that serve you have success. And so I don't, maybe it's different when you're still in the uniform, but I look at it as a former guy and say, you know what, if Kirby wins, it'll be kind of that good for him attitude for me.
I'm sorry, my earpiece may have been messed up. Did you just use Jeremy Pruitt and success in the same sentence?
At some point. Now listen, we can do that because that Auburn football game. Oh, there's no Auburn fans in the comment section.
One thing I can be pretty sure of with Dog Nation's video channels, with me here and you there, pretty sure that Auburn fans are pretty turned off by this whole deal.
That's one thing we could all come together on here.
One way or another. By the way, that is Mike Johnson. You hear him on the radio every day as a part of the Backroads Sports Network. We are Backroads.com for more on that. My name is Brandon Adams. Thanks for being here on Road to Atlanta, driven by Cadillac and the all-new 2019 XT4 crossover, a vehicle that's so nice it'll allow you to enjoy the journey as much as the destination. It's available in luxury, premium, and sport packages. It includes 8 airbags, the most advanced Bluetooth, a heads-up display, and with 5 Atlanta area locations, it is convenient to use. So simply go to Cadillac.com to find out more about the brand new, all-new 2019 XT4 crossover, including the Cadillac location that's closest to where you live. All right, let's talk more. We'll hear from Kirby Smart and Georgia players more throughout the program here on Road to Atlanta, driven by Cadillac. But let's also take a quick preview of what's going to happen tonight when the College Football Playoff Selection Committee re-releases, once again, its College Football Playoff Top 25. These are the final rankings that come out before the rankings that truly count, really the only ones that actually matter, next Sunday. This is our final preview of the committee's thought process before the actual set in stone playoff rankings are released on Sunday. As a preview of what will happen tonight, or we think is going to happen tonight, let me show you what happened last week in terms of the top 6. Alabama has been number 1. Clemson's been at number 2. Notre Dame has been at 3. They are now in the clubhouse, undefeated. Michigan, last week's number 4 team, loses. My guess is that Michigan takes a pretty significant fall, although not outside the top 10. We have Georgia last week at number 5 and Oklahoma last week at number 6. Mike, let me tell you what my thoughts are on what's going to happen tonight. You can tell me if you agree or disagree. I think that Georgia moving up to 4 is almost a lock. Now
Right.
It is like the most worthless thing in the world to be number 4 in these rankings tonight,
Right.
but Georgia is going to be at number 4. I am assuming that Oklahoma stays at 6 and Ohio State goes ahead of Oklahoma at number 5 on the virtue of who Ohio State beat. They just beat last week's number 4 team, Michigan. And maybe you can say that's a little bit of a foreshadowing of the committee's thinking on both Oklahoma and Ohio State in a head-to-head comparison. But I'm thinking it's Oklahoma that stays at 6 and Ohio State that leapfrogs at number 5 on the virtue of a big win.
I completely disagree with you, and I think, listen, that's not the first time it's
Right,
happened
yeah,
here
yeah.
on in these two
Right,
seasons.
yeah,
It's not the first time it
exactly,
happened.
exactly.
When I look at Oklahoma, they played almost just as big as the team last week in West Virginia that Ohio State did in Michigan. And really, when you look at the rankings from last week and you compare them to what you might see tonight, the fact that Ohio State was at 10. And the fact that you saw LSU up ahead of them and some of UCF up ahead of them and some of the other football teams you saw in front of Ohio State, I think that told you what the committee really thought of Ohio State. Now, obviously, they're going to get a ton of credit for beating a Michigan football team that now has 2 losses, but I don't think it's enough to push them into the 5 slot. I really think you're going to see Georgia at 4, Oklahoma at 5, and Ohio State probably at 6.
Earl Watts agrees with you. He's mad at me. He says, BA, come on, man. Here's what I believe the committee's going to say about this. I think they're going to say that, while Ohio State was certainly dinged by all of us, coming into last week, a new data point was added. Beating Michigan, and you mentioned Michigan's got 2 losses, but their only 2 losses are to playoff contenders.
Yep.
At Notre Dame to start the season, with Ohio State here at the end of the season. I don't think this committee wants Oklahoma into the playoff. I think the football folks in this committee, to the extent they have any voting power whatsoever, are turned off by the absolute lack of defense that Ohio State plays, or I should say that Oklahoma plays.
Well, either one. Just fill in the
Right. And Ohio State kind of got left out last year in controversial fashion. By the way, even if Alabama loses on Saturday, I think this committee will have a memory of what happened to Ohio State a year ago. I think it's going to be very tough to keep Ohio State out of the playoffs.
I think it is too. I think the scenario I'm looking at, and listen, I'm going to be honest with you guys, and I'm not just saying that because I'm on Dog Nation. I don't even know that Georgia would have losses out of this scenario, in my opinion.
Okay.
I really don't. And I know that people kind of, Big Ten fans especially, jump all over me for saying this, and they roll their eyes about it. The fact that Ohio State was in that 10 spot a week ago just still continues to loom over my head. I think if Oklahoma wins against Texas this weekend and Georgia loses, you're probably going to slot Oklahoma into that 4 slot. I don't know that Bama's set in stone, though, to get to that 4 slot if Bama loses against Georgia this weekend. I think that if Oklahoma loses, really that 4 spot could be up for grabs from maybe 3 or 4 different teams.
Troy Sadowski, who you should know is a great former Georgia tight end from the 80s, is on our Facebook comment section. He says that if he was ranking, he'd actually have Clemson number 1 right now. As an Alabama guy, I'll ask you, take Georgia out of this for a moment. When you look at the non-SEC teams Alabama could play, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Clemson, which one do you think presents the biggest challenge for Alabama potentially?
Well, first of all, I think I said this on yesterday's show. I think Georgia, if I have Alabama at number 1, I think Georgia's the second best team in the country. I just do. I think they have the best shot of beating Alabama. I think they're going to be given every shot this weekend. I think it's going to be an extremely close game when it's all said and done, the SEC championship. I actually don't think, I think it's in terms of what worries me against Alabama, I actually look at a team like Oklahoma that I think is worse. Now, I don't worry about their defense, but when you set out really an offense that can beat a Nick Saban style of defense, Kyler Murray is prototypical. I mean, he is just a prototypical quarterback that can go out and beat you on a football field if you're Nick Saban's defense. So, listen, I saw Bama face off against Clemson in the Sugar Bowl last year. I was in for that. I know that Trevor Lawrence is different than Kelly Bryant.
I think he's a lot different.
I think he's a lot different, but yet I don't think he's faced that many tough teams. And while I respect what he's saying about having Clemson number 1, let's look at the ACC for a second.
Right.
I mean, the ACC is downright awful. I mean, they are an absolutely awful conference when you look at what they've done this year. Pitt's going to be in the championship game. Pitt took a 30-point loss to UCF early in the year. So I know that Clemson looks like world beaters. I give them a lot of respect for what they've been able to do, but I do look at that Clemson against South Carolina game from this past weekend. South Carolina had some success offensively.
That is the one thing I would disagree with our buddy Troy Sadowski on when it comes to having Clemson number one. I do think it is a very, very suspect schedule, and I think if I had to pick a playoff caliber team I'd want to see Georgia play, I actually might choose Clemson a little sooner than some people might think, and this is going to drive a lot of our audience crazy. I think I might try to avoid Ohio State for a little while if I could.
Yeah.
I think Ohio State is sneaky dangerous.
I think they're sneaky dangerous too. The lack of consistency I've seen from that football team.
And they can't run the ball at all.
They cannot run the
try
football. Dwayne Haskins, though, really opened things up this last weekend. And listen, I do my radio show during the week. It's been a point of contention. I said the other day that I was happy for Ohio State that they won the game against Michigan. And listen, I would have loved to seen a Nick Saban or Kirby Smart match up with a Jim Harbaugh. But what people have to understand when I look at Ohio State, I'm not looking at the Urban Meyer story, that situation. I know the players in that locker room are unfortunate to be in the situation they've been put in this year. So I was a little bit happy for Ohio State. But I'm with you. I don't know if I want any part of that come playoff time.
It's Road to Atlanta driven by Cadillac. We're going to hear more from Georgia coaches and players in just a moment. Before we get to that, though, let me remind you about a couple big things coming up for us here this week as we head on that road to Atlanta, including live on Thursday, starting at 6 p.m. Now, the broadcast will begin at 7 p.m. So for those of you who are following us on the Road to Atlanta driven by Cadillac this week, Thursday's the one day where our broadcast time is going to be slightly different. We're 5 p.m. Eastern every day this week but Thursday. On Thursday, we come to you live on video at 7 p.m. But if you're in the Atlanta area, we'd love to have you come out and join us starting at 6 p.m. at the Marlows in Brookhaven for Road to Atlanta Live there. It's 3575 Durden Drive in Atlanta. Our buddy John Stinchcomb, the great former Georgia offensive lineman, a part of the first SEC champion Georgia team that actually played in the SEC championship game back in 2002. John's going to be on hand. Jeff Sintel's going to be there as well. This is going to be the biggest event we've done at Marlowe's yet this year, so far this year. We'd love to have you there at 6 p.m. starting Thursday at the Marlowe's in Brookhaven. Come on by and see us for that. Then on Saturday, another huge event. It's our Road to Atlanta tailgate at the Blue Lot right across the street from the stadium that day. It is going to be an incredible moment. Dixie Vodka on hand with the complimentary samples. That was a huge hit last year, as you might imagine. Going to be true once again. Kroger's going to be there. Our friends from Cadillac, Marlowe's Tavern, Pella Window and Door. We've got gigantic TVs set up. We're going to have some free Dog Nation giveaways that day, including, I've been told, some brand new Road to Atlanta t-shirts. Never before seen. We're going to have those on hand that day. A whole lot more. Dog Nation personality is going to be there. I'm going to be there. Jeff Sintel's going to be there. Please come see us at the Road to Atlanta tailgate starting at 11 a.m. on Saturday, right next to the stadium in the Blue Lot on Northside Drive. All right, with that said, Carl McCullers in our Facebook comment section apparently must be an Alabama fan, so that he doesn't think that Georgia's going to be able to move the ball on Alabama. He said this in our Facebook comment section a little earlier. He doesn't think that Georgia's going to be able to get the job done offensively. Well, you should know that Kirby Smart was asked this week, when you look at that Georgia offense, obviously, and we mentioned this yesterday, one of the most impressive position groups for either team in this game are those Alabama wide receivers. I just think that group is incredibly impressive. Georgia's group is deep, but is it as impressive as what the Alabama wide receivers have been thus far this season? And as Carl McCullers right, that Georgia's not going to be able to move the football against Alabama with these receivers. Well, Kirby Smart talked about that. Let's hear Smart on the subject of his wideouts against Alabama's.
I think it's a tough comparison. I don't like doing comparisons. I got a lot of respect for Alabama's wideouts. I think they're tremendous. I think they're probably the best unit we've faced, and they're talented, man. They get vertical, they run routes, they stick their feet in the ground, and they've got a good guy throwing it to them. But so do we. We've got a good wide receiver core. We've got a deep wide receiver core across the board. A lot of guys have stepped up, and Jake allows those guys to make plays. So comparing them, I think it's hard to say because I'm certainly proud of the way our guys play on special teams and play physical, but their guys are very talented too.
So I think what Kirby says there is right, that Georgia's wide receivers are incredibly deep and they're versatile because a lot of these guys have been special teams contributors. I know it's a joke and people mock this all the time, but these guys are also really willing blockers. A lot of these great DeAndre Swift runs you've seen as of late have been opened up by wide receivers like J.J. Holloman. But the one thing that I do think that Alabama currently has that I'm not so sure Georgia does yet is I think that Jerry Jeudy's a first-round pick, and I don't know yet, and maybe Alabama may have more first-round picks in that wide receiver core. They got a real deep group. I don't know as of yet there's a Georgia receiver that's emerged that is a likely, first-round pick type guy. So if you take the overall depth of the Georgia wide receiver group, I think it compares pretty favorably. But in terms of one guy really stepping up and emerging the way that I believe that Jeudy has for Alabama, I don't know that top end talent of the Georgia wide receiver group is necessarily there quite as much.
Yeah, no, I think I understand what you're saying about that, and I think that, listen, that's why I think it's a good thing for Georgia that DeAndre Baker matches up so well, because I don't think that Bama has a corner like that. I don't know that Georgia's wide receivers are up to par with Bama's wide receivers, but I don't necessarily think that Bama has a corner the way that Georgia does DeAndre Baker. So I think it kind of evens out the way I look at some of these matchups. Now, I will say this: if Jerry Jeudy's an A and the rest of the wide receivers at Bama are B or B pluses, they're all very good. Jalen Waddle is a true freshman. He's extremely good. You're going to see Henry Ruggs. I mentioned yesterday Irv Smith Jr., the tight end, is a very good player as well. Georgia's group of wide receivers, to me, they're very dynamic. I don't know that you see that upper end, that really, first round talent kind of guy, but I definitely think they all do fit in that B plus category, and they're all extremely explosive.
One of the things we've seen too over the last few weeks is this group, the Georgia wide receivers, have much better success. Georgia overall offensively has just been really a kind of a rocket ship since the lost LSU, the bye week after that, the Florida game, the Kentucky game, the Auburn game, UMass and Georgia Tech, to the extent that you care about those performances. The offense for Georgia has played much better. And one of the things that Kirby Smart said is, in terms of why this offensive group has clicked the way it has, it really goes back to the offseason work that Fromm and these wide receivers have done to get their timing down. Their relationship, their chemistry is the kind of thing that doesn't happen just because you snap your fingers. Here's more from Kirby Smart talking about those Georgia wide receivers.
They're getting better. They throw and catch a lot together. I think Jake has a trust with that group, and they trust him that the ball is going to be there on time, and let's give them some credit. They run good routes and get open and catch the ball. But none of this happens without the protection, and that's one of the keys to this game is, number one, keeping the quarterback upright because of the number of sacks and this disruption they have, but our guys protecting the quarterback well and being able to have balance, because you don't want to live in third and longs against this team.
I'm going to take a moment to address what Kirby Smart says there at the end on the notion of the protection that Jake Fromm is getting from his offensive line is enabling some of the passing success that Georgia's had. I think it's 100% true. And Mike, I know that one of the hot topics from around really the SEC media world and SEC fans and the national stuff beyond the bubble of Dog Nation has kind of been, is this Georgia team comparable to the one that's from last year? There are a couple of areas which I wholeheartedly believe that Georgia's actually better than it was a season ago. And the offensive line is an example of that because, if you're watching Georgia closely every single Saturday, here's what you've seen. You've seen Andrew Thomas miss some, I don't want to say significant time, but he missed some key plays for Georgia earlier in the year. Ben Cleveland hasn't played in a while. Cade Mays is one of Georgia's 5 best offensive linemen, even though he's a freshman. He's been injured for a few weeks. If Georgia had these kinds of offensive line injuries a year ago, the SEC championship game never happens. The Rose Bowl never happens. College football playoff, national championship game to Alabama, it never happens. Georgia wasn't deep enough to withstand these kinds of injuries from its offensive line last season. But this year, it really hasn't skipped a beat. Now, it'd be better to have all these guys back healthy, but Georgia has withstood those injuries. So when you're talking about the success the receivers have had, the success that Fromm has had, I think Smart's right. You do have to give a lot of credit for the offensive line for enabling that to happen.
Oh, Kirby Smart, you know the weight of my heart, don't you? I mean, let me
the former offensive lineman.
Let me just tell you about this offensive line from Georgia, man. I love watching. And honestly, listen, there's a guy named Josh Jacobs who's a running back from Alabama. Does it all: fullback, running back, catches balls, goes down and covers kicks. I always say all the time on Twitter, Josh Jacobs is my favorite player. Cade Mays might be my second favorite player. The way this guy has been able to step in as a true freshman and play offensive line, really when you look at the first quarter against LSU, now I know they struggled running the ball throughout the second quarter and the rest of the game, but when you look at Cade Mays in the first quarter against LSU, an absolute clinic of playing right guard against an aggressive LSU defense. I really like what he's been able to do, and I agree with you. The depth they have from not only depth, not only do you have quality players, you have exceptional players. You have guys that in the future are going to be all-star players for Georgia that might be sitting on the sideline at points during this game. So I'm with you. I think they can roll with the punches much better than they did a year ago. I think there are parts of both of these teams that are better. There's some parts of these teams that are worse than they were last year. That's going to make this such an interesting matchup.
My favorite thing about Cade Mays, you're just talking about, he looks to me like he's been kicked out of every bar he ever walked into. Now, he's not 21 yet.
I'm telling you.
So, theoretically, he can't walk into a bar, but the way that he plays, he just looks like he's always stirring up trouble and always, in school suspension or something like that for getting in fights. That's a guy that just looks like he was 5 minutes from his last fight.
I'm telling you, that's the way to my heart. I
Yeah.
love the guys that are gritty guys, that are blue collar about their work ethic, and the fact that he's a true freshman. I mean, it's been nothing short of spectacular. The way I've watched him on film and what I've seen him be able to do, he's stepped right into that role. Not only has he filled a gap, but he has excelled doing it.
Hashim Spikes in our YouTube comment section also mentions a couple of other those freshman offensive linemen. Shamari Salyer, who's played a lot more as of late. Trey Hill, who right now is still working at first-team right guard, given the fact that it looks like Ben Cleveland may still be dealing with a bit of an injury. It's those freshmen as well who've allowed Georgia to have this offensive line depth that it just did not have in 2017. Bryce Dixon in our Facebook comment section also mentioning Elijah Holyfield, the Georgia running back who's been a part of this potent Georgia offense. He says he wants to see Holyfield truck right over Lindell Mack Wilson, the Alabama linebacker. Well, I guess Kirby Smart would probably like to see that too. It's been not just improvement for the passing game over the last 5 games for Georgia, it's improvement for the running game as well. Georgia's been north of 200 yards rushing in each of its last 4 games. Credit to DeAndre Swift. Credit to Holyfield, who our commenter was just mentioning. And that tandem for Georgia is certainly part of the recipe for potential success against Alabama, and Kirby Smart talked about both of them this week too. Take a look.
I think both those backs would tell you they benefit from a physical offensive line and a group of receivers that are a threat to catch the ball. So, those things help open boxes, and when people don't want to play you one-on-one, which Alabama will, they open up things for the other guys, and that's important. But Elijah's been tremendous, and he's got a good knack for getting the ball in the end zone, and he's a slasher. He's not afraid of contact.
I mean, I think that it's the oldest cliche in the book with that idea of the Mr. Inside, the Mr. Outside, the thunder and the lightning.
Yeah.
Holyfield is a little faster than some people give him credit for, and DeAndre Swift certainly does not dodge contact. But when you've got the elusiveness and the outright top-end speed that Swift brings to the table, and Holyfield, those big old arms and that desire, that demand to go out there and create contact, that has been a very nice complementary situation for those two this year.
It's a violence. I mean, it really is a violence that I see Elijah Holyfield run with, and I've been extremely impressed with not only him, but DeAndre Swift towards the end of the season, getting a little bit of health back, really seeing that explosion start to come back into his steps. And listen, I played with a duo running backs in my time at Alabama too. You saw that out of Mark Ingram and Trent Richardson. Very different styles. Trent Richardson, this true freshman that comes in and he's kind of a bulldozer and he's running over people. And Mark Ingram really liked the stretch plays. He liked getting outside, being able to make one cut and get up the field. Won a Heisman Trophy on it. I see a lot of that in both these guys. I actually think DeAndre Swift is probably faster than any of the talent we had at Alabama back in 2009, and Holyfield runs with just as much explosion. So it's been, as an offensive lineman, those two guys have been a pleasure to watch go at it this year.
Yeah, and I will say that while I think for the most part, speaking not just as a talk guy here, but also as a fan, I've remained for the most part pretty confident in Georgia all season long. But there was that stretch early in the year when we just weren't seeing it from DeAndre Swift.
Right.
He was apparently dealing with the groin injury. We've kind of learned more about that now than we knew at the time. Kirby Smart was playing it pretty coy and kind of mums the word on a lot of that. There was this moment when I thought, boy, this Georgia offense is just going to be missing something because they don't have, Zamir White's hurt. DeAndre Swift is either not as good as I thought he was or also hurt. All of a sudden, these last 4 games, he's been healthy as a daisy, and boy, that has been really something fun to watch.
Yeah, it's one of the topics you and I had on SEC Country Live a lot when we were back in June, July. We started talking about Heisman frontrunners and Heisman odds coming out, and my sleeper of the year was DeAndre Swift. I knew that DeAndre Swift would have that explosion, but I'm with you. Look at the early part of the year, some of the the nagging issues obviously he had with the groin strain you're talking about. You didn't see that step. I really think that he has been the key to unlocking Georgia's offense throughout the last 5 or 6 weeks. And I see a lot of people in the comment section saying the LSU game really woke up this Georgia football team. I don't know if it was the loss that woke them up. Maybe it was. But I think the addition of having DeAndre Swift back healthy and and kind of combining that with the loss to LSU, boy, oh boy, man, they look like a runaway freight train right now on offense.
All right, I had some Facebook comments coming in because some people are bringing up some good points. Let me read a couple of these. First of all, our buddy Austin Kilby says, BA, you got to talk about Jordan Davis. Can we please talk about this? Georgia needs a huge nose guard to hold down that interior. We got Hawkins Munkle back, too. We're only missing Monty Rice. Tommy Williams says, don't forget, guys, we had Tua running for his life in that game last year. Young linebackers now ready to step up, too. It sounds like, Mike, we got a lot of Georgia fans who want to talk about the defense and how Georgia potentially can stop Tua Tagovailoa on Saturday. So we'll do that here on Road to Atlanta, driven by Cadillac. My name is Brandon Adams. That is Mike Johnson, the former Alabama All-American. You can hear every single day on the Back Road Sports Network.
In peace.
Yeah, he comes in peace today. We need this guy to give us that enemy intel, and he's been good enough to do that. You can go to wearebackroads.com to find out more about Mike's daily radio program. I'll also tell you that our show, as we said, driven by Cadillac here today. The all-new 2019 XT4 crossover, a vehicle so nice that the destination is going to be just as much fun as the journey. It's available in a luxury premium sport package. Includes 8 airbags, most advanced Bluetooth, heads-up display. Go to Cadillac.com to find out more, including the 5 Atlanta area locations where you can get yours today. Show up in style at the tailgate on Saturday in the all-new 2019 XT4 crossover from Cadillac. All right, folks want to talk about defense, so let's do that. We'll first of all hear Kirby Smart here, because Smart was asked about a pretty interesting question. Georgia, and it was actually Dog Nation Chip Towers who was pointing this out, Georgia has had, from a defensive standpoint, fewest number of plays of 20 or more yards allowed of any team in the country this season. They've been good in that regard. Kirby, though, said, well, that may sound good. It's maybe not all it's necessarily cracked up to be. Here's a little bit of Kirby talking about one area in which Georgia's defense has actually excelled this season.
Well, I think that's sometimes can be a misleading stat, but this year our kids have done a good job keeping people cut off and not giving up explosive plays, and you do that by leveraging the ball, and you do that by not busting coverages. You do that by not getting beat man-to-man, and those are things that we have to do every game. It's not like we have to do them this game. We have to do it every game. But along with that, we got to do a good job affecting the quarterback, and sometimes that exposes you to more risk, and you got to go play better.
What he says there at the end is obviously the most important part of all of this. And we talked about this yesterday, and for me, as someone who's certainly not an expert on the X's and O's, but who is fascinated by that storyline of this game, it's that trade-off of you have to get some pressure. But every time that you do, you are making a trade-off. It is a potentially high reward, but continually high risk situation of, if I send an extra guy into the backfield, that's just made Tua's passing lane this much wider, and Tua Tagovailoa is a quarterback that can attack that. How does Georgia manage that?
Yeah.
About when to rush the passer and when to stay back and try to limit Tua's ability to make big, deep throws.
Yeah, I got to be honest with you, too. I saw a comment earlier in the Facebook comment section, and somebody referenced the fact that when Tua gets pressure in his face, he's not very good and he's prone to mistakes. It's just not true. Mm-hmm. It's just not true. If you look at the stats this year in terms of what Tua Tagovailoa does against the blitz, he makes teams pay for the blitz more than anybody in college football. Yeah. And he's able to pick these teams apart. But we talked about this yesterday. If you're going to try to get pressure on Tua Tagovailoa, it's got to come in the A-gaps. You cannot rush a guy from the outside. This has happened too many times this year. There's been a cornerback blitz or somebody off the slot coming outside, and then all of a sudden a running back releases, and there's nobody in the flat, and Tua Tagovailoa is so good at hitting his running backs in the stride out in the flats, be it Damian Harris, be it Josh Jacobs or Najee Harris. He's hitting them in stride and allowing them to make moves on the flat defender, throwing right into these blitzes. So if you're going to do it, you've got to get this young linebacking core from Georgia to try to hit it up in the A-gaps and just hope that they can get home, that they can apply that pressure before Tua is able to find the open wide receiver behind him.
I'm a fan of a writer named Bill Conley who works for footballstudyhall.com, and he had written a piece about this game, and he's obviously coming at this from the stats angle, and he said that Georgia's defense, as Kirby was asked about there by Chip Towers, Georgia's defense has been really good at limiting the very deep passing plays. Obviously, Tua is probably the best deep throw quarterback in the entire sport right now, one of the best we've seen. What Conley said, though, at Football Study Hall is that Tua's only very good. Like, he's not the greatest of all time.
Right.
He's only very good when it comes to intermediate throws.
I agree.
Would you agree with that? That if you can force Tua to throw in that kind of 11 to 17 yard range, that is a little bit more, and be careful how I'm saying this. I'm not saying that's a weakness. It's just not quite as much of a strength as these 50-yard bombs he's been throwing all season long.
I definitely agree with that. And listen, I'll take, obviously Georgia fans didn't pay much attention to Alabama's season, but let me take you back a few weeks, and a lot of people saw what happened in the Mississippi State game. Going into the Mississippi State game, Alabama's offensive line had only allowed 6 sacks. And I say offensive line, really the offense as a whole had only allowed 6 sacks. Tua had been so good at finding some of these hot routes and finding guys in the flats. Mississippi State, understanding that Tua Tagovailoa had a knee injury, they smelled blood in the water. They started bringing blitz from everywhere. Strong safeties, middle linebackers, outside linebackers, off the slot, started bringing it from everywhere. Tua Tagovailoa did get just a little bit confused at times. He didn't find some of his hot routes. He didn't find some of his outlet passes or some of the guys coming across the middle. And I think that LSU kind of followed that up, gave a little bit of a blueprint, obviously, and you've seen some of the rest of the year. Auburn, I'm sorry. You've seen some of that throughout the rest of the year. Guys that want to blitz up the pocket. It's all about, can Tua Tagovailoa diagnose it? And I know that Georgia fans ask, okay, well, how can you beat this? pre-snap disguising.
Yeah.
And Kirby Smart is so good at this, as is Nick Saban, disguising these defenses, not letting Tua get the pre-snap reads. It's the same thing that Bama's going to be battling with Jake Fromm. Jake Fromm, we know he's a cerebral quarterback.
Yeah.
Can they read the defense and what's going to be going on before the snap when you give the fake clap? You know, both these guys use the clap. They do the fake. Yeah, they don't clap just yet. They want to see where people are moving from. It's going to be a huge key to the game whether or not either of these quarterbacks can diagnose.
On our YouTube comment section, I got 2 really good comments from K9 Blues and Brian Kephart. I want to read both of these. Let me let you hear from Jonathan Ledbetter first on this subject of rushing the passer, getting after him. You know, from Ledbetter's standpoint, he knows that's going to be a part of the game plan, and he knows that whatever Mel Tucker and Kirby Smart decide, that's what he's all ready to do. Here is Ledbetter on his thoughts about what the potential game plan against Tua Tagovailoa might be.
I think that, you know, we have faith in whatever our coaches call. They got a good game plan for us this week, whether that's 3 guys down, 4 guys rushing, you know, or if we surprise them and do something exotic, you know. I think the guys, whoever in the game is out there rushing, they're going to play and they're going to affect the quarterback. That's what we do. I think it's more the opponents. You know, we had a lot of people, you know, doing a lot of quick game on us and stuff like that. And, you know, we've been working on our rushing and, you know, trying to get back to affect the quarterback, whether that's, you know, batted balls or, you know, just, you know, QB hurries or just doing other things rather than just getting sacks. Because, you know, that's not, you know, sacks don't always win games. It's just about, you know, doing your job and affecting the quarterback. So that's what we're focused on.
The last answer there from Ledbetter is in reference to the fact that statistically speaking, you talked about this yesterday, statistically speaking, Georgia really hasn't been that great at rushing the passer and getting the quarterback. You also touched on this, that with Tua, if all you do is put pressure on him, he's off the charts in terms of handling that pressure. Fromm is too. For the most part, all really good quarterbacks are usually really good against
if you're
the blitz.
playing in a championship game.
Because but it's also really good quarterbacks when you blitz them, it's just easier to throw the ball. Because if you can, you know, stay on your feet, you got more lanes to throw to. But Georgia, statistically speaking, has not been great at actually bringing a quarterback down to the ground, which is why K9 Blues comment on YouTube is important. He says one thing that doesn't get taken into account enough is the growth of the team, meaning Georgia, especially the youngest team in the SEC, us. Comparing what we did at LSU to what we'll do Saturday is just wrong. So that last part I would probably agree with on the idea of a young Georgia team getting better. Let me just lay this out and be as matter-of-fact as I possibly can be, and maybe not every Georgia fan agrees with this. I think that Georgia's got a chance to win this game on Saturday. But for me, a lot of my eggs are put in the basket of I've got some young linebackers who maybe haven't been called on to get after a quarterback that may be sprung into duty for the first time. And Chip Tower said this on Dog Nation Daily earlier this week, and I think it's a really smart point. Last year, Alabama's surprise for Georgia was Tua Tagovailoa in the second half. I don't believe that Georgia's return favor is going to be, it's Justin Fields in the second half. I don't think they'll need that. I think Fromm's playing too well right now. But it could be just as effective to say, you haven't seen Channing Tindall on a blitz yet. Watch this. You haven't seen Brenton Cox on a blitz yet. Watch this. They may not be ready. They may still just be too young. But that to me is the recipe for a Georgia victory. It's surprise, we got some freshman linebackers who actually get after a quarterback.
Yeah, and it's the speed too. When you look at the dynamic speed that you get from those freshman quarterbacks, that's what you get with the 5-star guys that come in and you look at it and you say, this guy runs a 4.4. Why is it that more important than a guy that runs a 4.6? How fast can you get from linebacker depth to the backfield? And that's such an important part. And listen, Bama's dealing with that right now a little bit with Dylan Moses and Mack Wilson, where these guys are so speedy that they can get back there before Tua Tagovailoa or Jake Fromm even understands what happens. Even, he's getting hit in the face before he knows and sees where the outlet is. But I also want to go back to something Jonathan Ledbetter said there a minute ago. Sometimes batted down passes can be just as effective. Because what happens?
Good point.
What happens when you bring those slots off the corner? Tua knows his outlet is behind that guy, or Jake Fromm knows his outlet is behind that blitzer. So when that blitzer's coming off the edge, being able to jump up, knowing where the weakness of the defense is, bat down some balls, maybe the interior defensive linemen know that they're blitzing, maybe they understand Tua's going to try to find a hot route over the middle. Jumping up and batting those balls down is going to be a big part of this game as well.
I want to ask you an X's and O's question about this in a moment, but Brian Kephart says we're going to have to be smart about blitzing, showing one side is vulnerable, but having a spy there or cheat the defense leverage there. Why do you think it is, and that's a good comment from Brian, but why do you think it is that from a strategic standpoint, Georgia now for quite some time has chosen coverage over sacks? I mean, I talked to Lorenzo Carter about this during the spring. That was one of the things that he said he was looking forward to going into the NFL for, because he thought he might get a chance to pin his ears back and rush the passer a little bit more. Why does Georgia just favor the opposite so much? Putting Carter into coverage as much as they did a year ago. Doing some of that this year as well. We've seen Walter Grant kind of back there doing some of that kind of stuff when he's potentially an effective pass rusher. Is there an easy answer for why it is that Georgia just seems to like what I think of as a safer brand of defense of let's put coverage back, keep the ball in front, as opposed to a more of a havoc-wreaking type defense?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's one particular answer. I think when you look at the X's and O's, it's all about matchups. It's all about who you're playing. Are you playing a pocket passing quarterback? Are you playing a guy who can beat you with your legs? Do you feel that your defensive ends and your outside linebackers match up well against the offensive tackles you're going against? Because if Kirby doesn't believe I can get there with 4 or I can get there if I bring an extra blitzer, then why not drop a guy back? Why not try to take, and especially with a guy like DeAndre Baker, it plays a huge part in some of these defensive calls because he understands this guy is going to have to go away from his first read. So maybe if we only rush 3, maybe given the fact that he's going to have to read 2, 3, and 4 in his progression, maybe that allows us some extra time to get there. Dropping guys back in the defense forces some of these quarterbacks to just take an extra little pause and have to really digest what they're seeing for an extra second.
Bulldog Chris on our YouTube comment section says, BA, you can have one or the other. If you want to go crazy after the quarterback, that thing about leading the country in fewest plays of 25 or more yards allowed, you can't have both.
Exactly.
You can have one or the other. And Bulldog Chris brings up a good point on YouTube that the byproduct of playing back defensively does limit those big plays. All right, one final point here, and this is kind of off the topic of what we've been on, but Chris Tittle brings up a really interesting point, and I don't mean to poke at you on this, but I do think for Georgia fans, they are certainly thinking about this as, one of the opportunities to win on Saturday. Chris Tittle talking about that huge special teams advantage that Georgia potentially has. But Georgia probably hasn't punted the ball as well this year as it did a year ago. Frankly, it hasn't punted at all the last few weeks. But Rodrigo Blankenship is one of the best kickers in college football. Georgia, statistically speaking, has been among the best in special teams. Not only has Alabama missed a whole host of extra points, had a punt blocked on Saturday. Yeah. This has been, it's really weird to say, the same way that Georgia has this gigantic Achilles heel of it can't seem to score from goal line situations and why is a good team so bad at this one area, Alabama is like, if you look at all the major stat blogs, they're number 1, number 2, number 1, number 2, and like every statistical category, they're barely in the top 100 of special teams. Can Georgia exploit that? In all seriousness,
no, I definitely think they can. And that's one of the things you and I talked about that's going last year in the national title game. Rodrigo Blankenship, and you made the point last year that you thought kickers, kind of give or take in certain ways. And I told you.
I'm grasping for everything I got this time around. I'll take everything I got.
I told you, BA, I said you only say things like that when you have a kicker. Yeah. When you don't have one, like Alabama doesn't right now, they've been through 2 different kickers all year, kind of back and forth between both these guys. That's when you take a deep breath. I mean, even on something as small, an extra point, imagine this now. Imagine if Georgia is winning by a touchdown going into the fourth quarter and Bama is driving down and they score a hopefully game-tying touchdown with 10 seconds left. You still have to kick the extra point. Yeah. And Bama has missed 8 of those, I believe, this year. And it's
2 different kickers.
And it's been
2 different kickers, 8 extra points.
And I'm not talking about barely missing the pylon. I'm talking about absolutely whiffing on balls, kicking to the back of the offensive line. I will say this much, though. Bama, in terms of comparing them to last year, the kicking game is still weak. I do feel like the return game is much better with Jalen Waddle this year as a punt returner.
Boy, he's fast.
He's explosive. If any of the Georgia fans have not seen him, he is really explosive. He almost fills that McCole Hardman kind of role. Boy, he can turn it on.
Let me tell you something. That don't matter because if Georgia's punting, they've already lost anyway.
I will say this, though.
If Georgia's lining up to punt, then it's already something bad.
In all seriousness, if it comes down to a field goal fest, the way Bama has in games past, the way you've seen right before the kick six and maybe the LSU game of the century in 2011, Bama will lose the game. It cannot come down to a field goal fest for Bama. You'll start seeing Nick Saban go for 2, and I'm not even kidding.
Plus, roof is going to be closed. It's pristine conditions. You think that sort of helps a good kicker more because there's nothing to prevent him from making what would normally be a makeable kick. Now, Rodrigo didn't have a couple missed touchback opportunities last week, but he's been among the nation's best kickers, despite the fact that, shockingly, he wasn't listed among the Lou Groza Award finalists, something that, Mike, I'm not sure if you noticed this, has made Georgia fans very upset.
I think I've noticed a little bit on the Twitter sphere. And listen, I'm still keep up with a lot of the Georgia fans, and they still keep up with me on Twitter. So I have seen a little bit of the back and forth.
Mike, it is so much fun to get a chance to break all this down with you. Your insight into not just what Alabama's going to do, but how this game's going to unfold. It's so much fun. Thanks for being a part of our program again once again today.
Love it, man. Excited to be back tomorrow.
We are backroads.com. You can find out more about what Mike's got going on. Let me tell you about a couple big things, though, before we get ready to sign off. Huge events for us coming up on both Thursday and Saturday. So if you like Road to Atlanta here, driven by Cadillac, you're going to love Road to Atlanta Live coming up Thursday at the Marlowe's in Brookhaven starting at 6 p.m. Now, if you can't be with us at the Marlowe's Brookhaven location, watch us on video starting at 7, but the event itself begins at 6. Marlowe's Brookhaven, that's 3575 Durden Drive in Atlanta. Jeff Sintel's going to be there. The great former Georgia offensive lineman John Stinchcom's going to be there at 6 to 8 p.m. this Thursday at the Marlowe's in Brookhaven, 3575 Durden Drive in Atlanta. And speaking of Marlowe's, they're also one of the proud sponsors of our Road to Atlanta tailgate coming up on Saturday, starting at 11 a.m. at the Blue Lot, which is on Northside Drive, right there across from the stadium, as well as our friends from Cadillac, Pella Window and Door, Kroger, and Dixie Vodka, who's not only going to be there, but on hand with those complimentary samples of the Dixie Vodka. In addition to that, there's also big TV set up. We're going to have music blaring. It's going to be a festive atmosphere. We've got some Dog Nation giveaways, including some T-shirts. Myself, Jeff Sintel, a whole host of Dog Nation personalities going to be there for it all. So if you're not just going to the game, but if you're anywhere near downtown Atlanta, come by and see us starting at 11 a.m. on Saturday at the Blue Lot on Northside Drive for our Road to Atlanta tailgate presented by our friends at Kroger and Marlowe's Tavern and Pella Window and Door, Cadillac, and Dixie Vodka. By the way, speaking of Cadillac, make sure you check out the brand new, all new 2019 XT4 crossover. Go to Cadillac.com and you can see why this vehicle is really turning a lot of heads on the roads right now, and you can get one for yourself there when you go to Cadillac.com. All right, we're back tomorrow at 5 p.m. for another episode of Road to Atlanta, driven by Cadillac. We'll look forward to seeing you there for that. I'll also see you tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for what this week we're calling Underdog Nation Daily, as we talk more about what else, the Dogs and the Tide, coming up on Saturday. For Mike Johnson, I'm Brandon Adams saying thanks so much for being with us here on Road to Atlanta, driven by Cadillac. We'll see you again tomorrow.